The Bay of Brest, 15 kilometers of oyster paradise. For Julian Koek, it's time to harvest this year's production, except today, he's come out to check on his baby oysters, also known as spat. He's on the lookout for any dead bodies. If the shell is open, the oyster is dead?
Yes, a dead oyster has an open shell. You see the little ones that have died, but also bigger ones.
And how many oysters die every year?
It depends. Each year I can lose 50, 60 or even 70% of my oyster spat. We can't go on like this and wait until it reaches 100%.
Mass mortalities are now the norm across the country. Inevitably, oystermen have had to rethink their farming practices. Although prices have doubled in 20 years, reaching €9 per dozen. For Julian, it's not enough to stay afloat. These oysters are the survivors?
Yes, these oysters are 2 to 3 years old. They're being weighed so we can get them ready for sale.
Have you been able to adapt to mass mortalities?
We've multiplied our spat collectors to catch more baby oysters. If we're dealing with a 70% mortality rate, well, we ought to grow 70% more to compensate.
Is it hard being an oysterman in France?
Mortality rates can vary from one year to the next. One year it drops and we think things are getting better, but they're not. We get even more deaths the year after. You never know what the future holds.
So could oysters be in danger? In France, production has been halved in the past 30 years. And since 2008, oyster populations have been decimated by a herpes epidemic. Humans can't contract the virus from eating contaminated shellfish, but the disease can kill both wild and farmed oysters, especially the young ones. Today, between 30 to 75% of oysters don't survive, and outbreaks have hit farms around the world. In this laboratory, scientists study the deadly virus, hoping to find a cure. To understand the disease, Guillaume Mita and his team have devised a simple method: exposing healthy oysters to the virus and observing how they die.
The disease begins with a viral infection that will spread rapidly and gradually reach the oyster's tissues until it gains control of the immune system. A generalized infection will develop and lead to the oyster's death.
Freezing oysters in time, the team has solved a decade-long mystery. The herpes virus will not kill the oyster, but make it vulnerable to other bacteria. A fatal combination that will finish off the mollusk in only 3 days. And climate change could make things worse.
We know the disease spreads when temperatures range between 16 and 24 degrees Celsius. And so, inevitably, global warming will have an impact on how the disease evolves.
We're about to visit the world's largest oyster hatchery, where experts are trying to breed an oyster that can fend off the virus. This is where more than 1 billion disease-resistant oysters are grown.
That's right. The oyster spat bred in the sieves you see here come from our own genetic selection. They have the potential to fight off the herpes virus.
And how exactly did you select them to get more robust oysters?
We started by crossbreeding several male oysters with female oysters to obtain a large number of families that we nursed in our farm. After that process, we counted the number of survivors from each family. We then crossed these families with each other so that year by year we would get more robust oysters with an increased survival rate.
And does it work?
Generally speaking, there is a higher survival rate, but it's not a miracle solution. Genetic selection does not mean that one day we could get oysters that never die.
Although selective breeding remains the most promising lead, critics warn against the loss of genetic diversity. so hatcheries are cautious to keep a wide selection. 98% of oysters in France are cupped oysters, a Japanese variety. But one biologist wants to restore Brittany's endemic species, the flat oyster. It almost disappeared in the 1970s, but now it has one big advantage: it can't get herpes.
The objective is to diversify oyster farming. We're not going to put all our eggs in the same basket, so we'll continue to grow cupped oysters, but we're also going to have flat oysters or scallops. Oystermen will be able to offer different products, but also diversify and ensure their production.
Flat oysters can succumb to other diseases. The industry may soon realize it is no silver bullet. Ultimately, this local variety will have a hard time competing with a cupped oyster, by far the most popular among consumers in France and around the world.